Hello friends, welcome to Aifer Education. So we are going to discuss an important topic today. It is nothing but Indian Constitution. We all have heard about the Constitution. Before starting the session, I want to ask some questions. How many days we have for the examination? How many days we have? We have just for 7 or 8 days for the examination. How your studies are going? How your studies are going? It is well? Okay, I hope your studies are going well. And we have been taking a session in this channel for those students who are going to write the upcoming examination. And we discussed the topic communication in the last classes. We discussed the topic mass media and society, and we discussed the topic new media and the digital media. Today we are moving to take the another session, that is Indian Constitution, and we know that we have one paper called higher education, right? So what is your opinion regarding the higher education? Is it a simple topic or is it a difficult topic? So higher education, we can say that it is relatively a simple topic. When we study well or when we read the notes regarding the higher education, we can easily score the marks. So when we analyzing the questions from higher education in the last terms, we can see the number of questions NTA were asked in the Indian Constitution. So it is one of the important topic, and we must study this topic. And not only for the examination purpose, we know that, so the topic is Indian Constitution. So not only for the examination purpose, but also as an Indian citizen, we should know about the basics of Indian Constitution, right? As an Indian citizen, we should know the basic about Indian Constitution, right? Yes. And in this class, we are going to take a session on some key and important points regarding the higher education. We are not going to discuss in detail. If you are a political science student, you have to study this topic in detail. But as a paper one point of view, we have to know that basic concepts, basic names, basic years, and the months and the dates regarding the Constitution. So in this class, it is specially focused on the higher education topic. Okay, it is specially focused on the paper one topic, that is higher education. So we have to know that fundamentals of Indian Constitutions, some basic concepts of Indian Constitutions we should have known. So we can move to so when we talking about the Constitution, first of all, what is the Constitution? The question is, what is the Constitution? What does Constitution mean? What do you mean by Constitution? Constitution means a set of guidelines, or we can say that a set of principles in which a state should be ruled, right? We can say that Constitution is a set of fundamental principles according to which state or other organization is governed. So in India, our state and our government organizations should be ruled on the basis of the Constitution. It is like a guidelines, it is like a fundamental principles. How a Quran stands for Muslims, how a Bible stands for Christian community, like the Constitution stands for people of India. So India and the state should be governed by Indian Constitution, should be governed based on Indian Constitution. So it is very important thing. And who was proposed the idea of constitution in India? Like we can say that who proposed India should need a constitution, India need a constitution, who proposed? It was proposed by M.N. Roy, a pioneer of communist movement in India. M.N. Roy given the idea that we have a constitution. Okay, we need a constitution. So who was given the idea that India need a constitution? Who proposed? M.N. Roy was proposed the idea that India need a constitution. Then when the Congress demanded India need a constitution, the Congress demanded in the year of 1935. In 1935, the Congress officially demanded India need a constitution. And so then move to the composition of Constituent Assembly. So what is the purpose of Constituent Assembly? When we are talking about Constituent Assembly, what is the purpose of making a Constituent Assembly? It is for preparing a constitution. Okay, so for preparing a constitution, we formed a Constituent Assembly, right? Then what is the strength? What was the strength in the Constituent Assembly? The strength of the Constituent Assembly was 389 members. There were 389 members in the Constituent Assembly, and out of these 296 from the British India and 93 from the princely states. So India were ruled by who was ruled India at that time? During the independent movement time, India was ruled by some of the portions, or major of the portions were ruled by British, and the others were ruled by princely states. So 296 from the British India and 93 from the princely states. Like we have the Constituent Assembly have 389 people. Out of these 389 people, 296 people from British India and 93 people from princely state, and they divided the seat based on the population. They divided the seat based on the population. In British India, they divided the seat based on the population. One seat to a million population. For a million population, they allocated one seat. Like that, they selected 296 members from British India. Then in princely state, the rulers nominate the members. Okay, in British India, they selected the members based on a one person for 1 million people. But in the case of princely state, the rulers were nominated the members. After the election, Congress won 208 and Muslim League won 73 seats. So these numbers, we should know about these numbers. For upcoming examination, there will be a chance to ask these numbers. So after the election to the Constituent Assembly, Congress won 208 seats and the Muslim League won 73 seats. Okay, so these things we should know about the composition of Constituent Assembly. Then we can move to next slide. So again we have to know about Constituent Assembly. In which year the Constituent Assembly was formed? In which year Constituent Assembly was formed? The Constituent Assembly was formed in the year of 1946. Okay, in which year the Constituent Assembly was formed? In the year of 1946, the Constituent Assembly was formed, right? What is the purpose? We have discussed that the purpose of making a Constituent Assembly, it is nothing but preparing a constitution. Okay, and this committee was formed in the year of 1946. Okay, then its first meeting on December 9, 1946. Okay, the Constituent Assembly held first meeting on December 9, 1946. Okay, so in which date the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly was held? The date is December 9, 1946. So we should not forget these dates. It is very important. And Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, the oldest member, was elected as the temporary president of the assembly. So in the Constituent Assembly, they were selected Dr. Sachidananda Sinha as a temporary president. Okay, temporary president. So he was the oldest member in that Constituent Assembly, and they were selected him as a temporary president of the assembly. And then later Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the president of the assembly. Okay, then later Dr. Rajendra Prasad was selected the president of Constituent Assembly. So who was the president of the Constituent Assembly? We can say that Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the permanent president of the Constituent Assembly. And who is this? Who was the Dr. Rajendra Prasad? Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the first Indian president, right? Who was the first Indian president? The first Indian president is Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and he was the elected president of the Constituent Assembly. Then H.C. Mukherjee and V.T. Krishnamajari were elected as the vice president of the assembly. Okay, so we are talking about Constituent Assembly. So first of all, we have to understand it was formed in the year of 1946, and the first meeting held in December 9, 1946. Dr. Sachidananda Sinha, the oldest member in the Constituent Assembly, was the temporary president. Later Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected the president of the Constituent Assembly, and he was the first president of India. And H.C. Mukherjee and V.T. Krishnamajari were elected the vice president of the Constituent Assembly. So these names, these years, these dates, we should have a thorough knowledge in these dates and months and years. For examination, NTA can be asked these kinds of questions. So we should have known about all these things. Then we can move to next slide. Then other functions performed. So what it means, other functions? So why we calling the other functions? Because what was the fundamental functions, or what was the primary function of Constituent Assembly? The primary function or the basic function of Constituent Assembly was to form a constitution, right? And apart from forming or preparing a constitution, they also performed some other functions, like the Constituent Assembly adopted national flag, and the Constituent Assembly adopted national anthem, and the Constituent Assembly elected Dr. Rajendra Prasad as first president of India, and the Constituent Assembly adopted national song. Okay, so we have to understand that Constituent Assembly was formed to prepare a constitution for India, but not only their function focused on preparing a constitution, but also they were functioned some other things, like they adopted national flag. In which date the national flag was adopted? So the national flag was adopted in the month of July, in the date of 22, and in the year of 1947. Okay, in the year of 1947, in the month of July 22, the Constituent Assembly adopted the national flag. And January 24 in 1950, they adopted the national anthem. And the same date, January 24, 1950, they elected Rajendra Prasad as first president of India. And again the same date, January 24, 1950, Constituent Assembly adopted the national song. So we should not forget these names and the dates and the year. Okay, so hope you understand. Then committees, then committees in the Constituent Assembly. So there are some committees under the Constituent Assembly. We can say that 8 major committees and 13 minor committees. So how many committees are there? We can say that there were 21 committees under the Constituent Assembly. In among the 21 committees, 8 were the major committees and 13 were the minor committees. So the number, we should have a thorough knowledge about these numbers. And okay, so we can discuss about the major committees, and we said that there were 8 major committees and 13 minor committees in the constituent, under the Constituent Assembly, and these are the major committees. Okay, so we can check one by one. Union Powers Committee and Union Constitution Committee and State Committee, Provincial Constitution Committee, Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minorities and Tribal and Excluded Areas, then Drafting Committee, then Rules of Procedure Committee, then Steering Committee. These are the 8 major committees under the Constituent Assembly. And who was led these committees? Who was led these committees? Who was guided these committees? We have to check that the Union Powers Committee was led by Jawaharlal Nehru. Union Powers Committee was led by Jawaharlal Nehru. Again, the Union Constitution Committee was led by Jawaharlal Nehru. Then State Committee also was led by Jawaharlal Nehru. And the Provincial Constitution Committee was guided by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Then again, Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minorities, Tribal and Excluded Areas was guided by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And the very, very important thing, the Drafting Committee was led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib, right? Who was led the Drafting Committee? It was led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Very, very important point. Then Rules of Procedure Committee led by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Again, the Steering Committee was led by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So the name of these committees and the name of the heads of this committee, we should have an idea about this while writing the UGC NTA NET examination. Then while talking about the Drafting Committee, so we are going to discuss the Drafting Committee. So when discussing the 8 major committees, we have discussed that out of that 8 major committees, the important committee was Drafting Committee. So what is the main function of the Drafting Committee? So the main function was of the Drafting Committee was to prepare a draft of the new constitution. So preparing draft of the new constitution is the function of the Drafting Committee, right? So what is the function of Drafting Committee? What function was performed by the Drafting Committee? Drafting Committee was formed to prepare a draft of new constitution, and we have to know that who was led by Drafting Committee? Who was led by Drafting Committee? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib was led the Drafting Committee. And in which date the Constituent Assembly appointed a Drafting Committee? In which date the Constituent Assembly appointed a Drafting Committee? So the Constituent Assembly appointed a Drafting Committee on 29th August 1947. Okay, on 29th August 1947. On 29th August in 1947, the Constituent Assembly appointed a Drafting Committee, and it was led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Sahib. So their duty was to prepare the Indian Constitution. Then who were the members in the drafting committee? How many members were in the drafting committee? How many members were in the drafting committee? There were 7 members in the drafting committee, right? So we can be expected a question from here regarding, especially from the drafting committee, and we understand that drafting committee performs the function to prepare a draft for the constitution, and it was led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And we have to understand that how many members were in the drafting committee? There were 7 members. How many members? There were 7 members in the drafting committee, and we can discuss about that 7 members. First of all, the chairman of drafting committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, then N. Gopalasamy Iyengar, Krishnasamy Iyer, Dr. K. M. Munshi, Sayyid Muhammad Sadullah, Madhava Rao, T.T. Krishnamajari, and they were replaced by B.L. Mittar and T.P. Khaitan. So these 7 members were in the drafting committee, and the chairman of the drafting committee was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. We should know about these names while going to write the examination. Then comes to enactment of the constitution. We have to understand that final draft introduced by Dr. Ambedkar in Constituent Assembly on November 4, 1946. Okay, in which date Dr. B.R. Ambedkar submitted or introduced the final draft? In which date? So it is one of the important area. In which date Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the chairman of the drafting committee, introduced or submitted the final draft of the constitution in front of Constituent Assembly? So the date is November 4, 1948. And there were held first reading on November 4 to November 9 in 1948. So first reading were held in November 4 to November 6 in 1948. In the first reading, they discussed about some improvements. They discussed about the suggestions. Okay, they introduced the members in the Constituent Assembly, introduced some suggestions in front of the drafting committee, and based on that suggestions, they were conducted a second reading. Now, the date is November 15, 1948 to October 17, 1949. So, in the second reading, they discussed the suggestions proposed in the first reading, and in the third reading, they made a conclusions on that. So the date is November 14, 1949 to November 26, 1949. So we should have a thorough knowledge about the dates. Regarding the first reading, November 4 to November 9, 1948. Regarding the second reading, November 15, 1948 to October 17, 1949. And the third reading were held November 14, 1949 to November 26, 1949. And above all, we have to understand the date November 4, 1948. In that date, Dr. Ambedkar was introduced to the final draft in front of the Constituent Assembly. Then we know that when India adopted the constitution, so India adopted on November 26, 1949. Okay, in November 26, 1949, India adopted the constitution. During that time, we had 399 articles, 22 parts and 8 schedules. Okay, so that time when we adopted the constitution, we had 399 articles, 22 parts and 8 schedules. And we know that the importance of January 26, right? Okay, we all know the importance of January 26. What is the What is the feature of now January 26? We know that in January 26, India is celebrating as a Republic Day, right? January 26, in every year January 26, India is celebrating the Republic Day. Why we are celebrating the Republic Day on January 26? Why we are celebrating January 26 as a Republic Day? Because the major parts of the Constitution came into force in January 26. Okay, the major parts of the Constitution came into force in January 26 in 1950. That is why in every year we are celebrating Republic Day in the date of January 26. Then very important thing, how many days took Dr. Ambedkar to prepare a constitution? How many years taken? How many days taken? How many months taken? So we know that it took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to finalize the constitution. Okay. So the question is, how many days Dr. Ambedkar took to prepare a constitution? It is just 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. So this is very important. So we should know about 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. And presently we have 448 articles, 25 parts and 12 schedules. Okay. So during the time of adopting the constitution, we had 399 articles. But now we have 448. So we discussed that during the adopting time of the constitution, we had 399 articles, 22 parts and 8 schedules. But now we have 448 articles, 25 parts and 12 schedules. So we should know about this while going to write the examination. So these are the things we have discussed today. So we discussed the fundamentals of the constitution. We discussed the key points of the constitution. We discussed the basics of the constitutions. It is very important for writing, for those students who are going to write the NET examination. I hope you understand. Thank you.